You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. My name is Billy D's, and with me on the studio line is Andrea LeDew. How are you doing, Andrea? So glad you are here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Billy. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, it's wonderful to have you here. This is interesting. This is a little different. Andrea LeDew is the author of Polemics, Political Poems and Prose. This collection is designed to resurrect Americans' love for their country, even in an era so full of chaos and tumultuous times. This book addresses events in American politics from 2016, that was quite a year, to early 2025. It ranges from biting commentary to moving odes to poems that jeer at the absurd. A brief intro explains the basic facts of each event, and then it goes into how it proved to be inspiring. Now, you are a resident of Jacksonville. You've been there a long time. You are busy with literature, language, law, and homeschooling. You have a website for Random Learning Comes, which is about 10 years old, and a lot of your poetry has been published in literary magazines, and it has been read at the literary today. Jax by Jackson panel for the St. Augustine Poet Fest. So, you've had some success with this. It's an interesting mix, I think it is, with politics and everything, to get involved in poems. Now, your pieces in this book were written over a period of approximately 10 years, from about 2016 until early 2025. How is this organized? And I would have to say, what inspired you to involve poetry and politics? That seems like a unique combination.
Well, it's one my English literature professor warned me against. I can tell you that.
Okay.
Apparently, there's a long history of poets writing on occasion. So being told to write a poem about the coronation or about someone's inauguration or something like that. And so I just took it to great lengths. And every time I saw a newspaper article or a broadcast that seemed to strike me as different from what I expected, something that shouldn't be happening from the way I was taught, then I would kind of take it apart and inspect it. I mean, I remember in particular going into there was an event with James Comey during the first Trump administration, you may recall.
Oh, yeah.
Where Comey had a meeting with Trump, and Trump basically, from what Comey reported anyway, asked for a loyalty oath under those conditions. And that inspired me to write a poem in which James Comey is basically a knight on a white horse, riding forth and trying to defend justice and take care of the little people against, bad guys. And then he has to have this confrontation where he's told, no, it isn't important whether you're doing the right thing. It's important that you're loyal to me.
Yeah. Is the book a kind of a humor book, or is it satire? Is this something you're going to get a lot of laughs from? How would you categorize the reader experience?
Well, I would say it'll make you think. I mean, I think there are a lot of times when I do poke fun at the people in power. For instance, I wrote a poem that's called Lunatic, And you may recall that during the second Trump administration, I'm not going to remember his entire name, but the immigrant whose name was Garcia, who got sent off to El Salvador, he had Trump had to go, or Trump's people had to go in front of a judge. And then Trump burst out in a tweet and called the judge a lunatic, which, I mean, ask any lawyer, they're not going to call a judge a lunatic. This is not the kind of way you speak to a judge. And so I basically cast him in the role of, I think it's King Charles II, who's got this wonderful portrait, and he's dressed all in silks, these beautiful, garments. And you can even see his little short trousers, like underneath pantaloons or something that are all in silk. And I just make fun of it and say, oh, I do like being a king. I really would like to have a lot of money, and all those things. So, in that way, I do use humor a little bit. In other poems, I can end on a very dire, warning kind of note.
Sure.
Or I can almost drift off into a despairing tone. It just depends on the subject matter. And I think it was easy during the first Trump administration because it seemed like every time anything happened, something else happened that fixed it.
Yeah.
Almost always. And this time it's been a little more spotty. Yeah. Sometimes eventually something has happened to fix it, but not always. And some things are still left unfixed. And that's kind of worrisome. Yeah. So I think at the end, I have a poem that's talking about our country and how over the years things have changed. We had a recession, we had 9/11, we had all these different events that changed our perspective on how friendly we would be to outsiders in our country. And also other countries have been watching us this entire time. And certainly I think since January that, the countries that used to be our fast friends, England, Europe, even the Ukraine, look at us now and kind of wonder, what are we going to do next? It's really not as predictable as it used to be. And I think that we've lost something in that.
Yeah. You mentioned you're involved with the law or interested in the law. In what capacity and how does that affect your writing on these things? I would think that would give you a good background.
Yeah, I did go to law school. I was an English major undergrad for 4 years at the University of Florida. So I used to drive right past where the villages are to get there from Central Florida. I was from Lakeland. And after I finished my undergrad degree, I applied for a scholarship to Germany. And I didn't think I was going to get it. So I went ahead and said I would go to law school in the fall. But turns out I got it. So I was able to go over to Würzburg, West Germany, still before the wall had fallen. This is like 1984, 85.
Oh, yeah.
Which just happens to be 40 years after the end of World War II. So there were all sorts of celebrations or commemorations, kind of interestingly in Würzburg, which was completely bombed, to oblivion, basically. And they rebuilt everything. Everything looks as old as it ever was. But in that town, they had a requiem. So they played, I think it was Mozart, but it might have been a different composer. Okay. But they had a special symphony presentation of a requiem just to commemorate the 40 years since Würzburg had been bombed and all the people, of course, who were killed during that period of time. And, they were our enemies. So that's what happens during war. But it was very interesting to be the person, from the country that did that. It really gives you a different perspective on how America is seen in the world.
Sure.
So anyway, I went to Germany, and then I came back after about 10 months in time to go to law school the following fall, and spent 3 years there. I was very interested in international law, as you can imagine, but I graduated into a recession. So there were no international law firms coming to get me. Yeah. So I basically, I ended up getting what I could get, and I worked for a collections law firm for a short period of time, about 9 months. And that was interesting. And then I worked for a child support enforcement law firm. So I was defending usually the custodial parent. So, or basically prosecuting the case of the custodial parent. And at that time, it was the Internal Revenue, it's the Revenue Department now that is in charge of child support, but it used to be HRS, Health and Rehabilitative Services.
Interesting. Okay.
So, for about 3 years. And then I had kids of my own. Then I never went back. So that is my law school experience and lawyering experience. Wow. And since then, I've used my law degree in various ways in just everyday life. I've had to, my son is an adult with autism. And of course, he went through school, from 6 months on, we knew something was going on with him. So he has always been either in the school system in special education, or after 4th grade, after he failed the FCAT twice, I took him out and I homeschooled him for the rest of his schooling. So, he has an education commensurate with his abilities, which is what the law requires. And that did, challenge my legal abilities, just keeping up with his education. And then since then, I've been the executor for my father's will, and that was also a different area of the law that I got to exercise those muscles. Sure. But mostly I just pay attention to the news and say, oh, that's not right.
Yes. Well, there's probably a lot of that, because I'll tell you, the news anymore and what is really news and what isn't is kind of hard to sift through. That's a whole nother topic. Interestingly, you mentioned autism. We have a lot of autism advocates on this program. As a matter of fact, it's pretty regularly. And I've been really interested in how the rates of that are climbing. And you'll hear different things. They'll say, well, it wasn't reported as much in the past, but I'm skeptical of that, because I don't remember when I was in grade school, these kinds of things happening like they do now. I mean, just about any school in town that you go to, when you go to drop off kids or whatever, there's always, special needs kids. And I don't remember them to that degree. What would you say? And because autism is a difficult subject to talk about, because people want it categorized and spoken about in a certain way. What would you say is one of the things, when you hear people talk about autism, what is one of the things that you would want to correct? One of the big misconceptions about it? What's one of the ones you would say, I hear this all the time and I know it isn't true?
Well, vaccines do not cause autism. That would be the obvious choice.
Okay.
I would say that people who have autism, obviously, they have varying abilities. My son has both autism and intellectual disabilities, so he functions maybe around 2nd to 6th grade level, depending on the subject. And this is a person who will likely have those kind of abilities for life.
Yeah. And
so I think a lot of people think that if you have a diagnosis, automatically services will follow. But during school, that is somewhat true if you fight for them. After you leave school, there's much less available. So it is really a very large burden on parents. And I think that is something people don't usually understand because, of course, the parents aren't going to talk about it. You don't want to draw attention to yourself, But I think every parent who has a child who is somewhat different wants to be welcomed in society, wants to be able to go anywhere, do anything. And the fact is that sometimes certain situations are more difficult when you have a person who has intellectual disabilities or limited attention span or maybe prone to tantrums or lashing out or all sorts of different kinds of behaviors that can appear in people with autism or intellectual disabilities. And you don't realize as an outsider what the intricate structure is that the parents have built up, or the teachers, all the different service providers have built up to make that person, they can operate in society, or they can operate within this area of society. For instance, we used to go to church. We used to go to church when my children were young. I had 4 children. I was going to baptize them all. I was going to send them all through. I was Catholic, and it became very, very clear after a little while that this was not going to be something that was completely tolerated. Sure. I mean, I had 14-year-old in the cry room, with infants. Yeah. And I tried to send them to, CCD, to religious education, and they did try. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't try, but it is very discouraging for parents to again and again be rejected in some way. You want everybody to just please, how can I help you? Or please come in, join us, and try to make it fun for them. But that isn't always the attitude. And when someone goes from being a cute little, 10-year-old to a scruffy, large, strong, loud, deep voiced man, then you have the element of fear as well, sometimes with strangers that you meet or people who say, why is that person on a playground? Sure. You get this feeling you might be intruding on others. They just think it's incongruous. Yes. And one of the reasons why you and I, people of a similar generation, don't recall people in our own generation being in school is because there was no individuals with education, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act at the time. There was 504 earlier, but there were very few protections for people like that. And generally, they were sent to institutions. They were not with the parents. They were taken away at a very early age, sometimes at birth. Okay. And this is a horrible, horrible thing that is in our past that we should all recognize and try to steer away from. We need to make, just as we make our roads, my husband is a traffic engineer, so I know about the roads. Just as we make our roads, friendly to pedestrians and to bicycles, even though roads are meant for cars, right? Yes. We should also make every element of our society welcoming to people who need a little help. Yes.
Well, that's an interesting point that you made about how, those types of issues were handled in the past. Very interesting point. And here again, every time I get into a discussion about autism, you always hear something that you didn't quite hear before. So I appreciate you talking about that. We are talking to Andrea LeDew, and she's the author of Polemics, Political Poems and Prose. You still use rhymes. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Oh, I always loved rhyme. I mean, I remember reading Robert Louis Stevenson as a kid, and I can still recite Shadow, and the Walrus and the Carpenter from Lewis and Carroll, and so on. I just enjoy things that you can remember. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you remember a poem that's not rhyming? It's a lot more difficult. Yeah. It is a mnemonic device, and we've been neglecting that part of our humanity, I think. We have so many things to remind us. We don't need to remember very much anymore, but sometimes it's valuable to have something, if you can say hope is a thing with feathers, and go on with that. That can be very comforting. It's like knowing a prayer. Mm-hmm. So that's part of why I use it. I think it's I think it is a structure that I'm attracted to, because I think lawyers like to be able to put things in boxes, Sure. And I think if you know that there's a certain type of rhyme coming up that you've got to meet, you will churn through the possibilities and get the one that is the most appropriate. Whereas you might just, if you were writing prose, you might just keep going. You might be 10 sentences down, but it makes you really think about what you're doing. And I realize it's not terribly, fashionable right now, but I enjoy it. And I think it is good in presentation as well. I just finished recording my audiobook. Oh. And I did it in a studio. So I did it the real way with my real author voice, not with any AI certainly not in my voice. And it was really interesting, because I think the author has an idea of how something should sound. Yeah. And when you read poetry that was written 200 years ago, you read Robert Browning or something like that, you are trying to figure that out, because he's not there. You can't listen to the record, or sure. the streaming Robert Browning. So, yeah, that's what I would say. I think it's traditional. I think it should not be exiled. It's much like, people with autism shouldn't be exiled. We shouldn't exile words from our vocabulary. We shouldn't exile thoughts from our philosophy. We shouldn't exile people from our midst.
Very true. I'll give you props for recording your book. I suppose the author would have a little bit of advantage, because you're already familiar with the material. And I get offers every once in a while, things we do here. And it's extremely time consuming to get familiar with the book, to get familiar with how to read it, and, to read it perfectly. Just to read an average book as casually, can take a week or two. Now that's not, all day long, but to perfectly read something out loud, you have to do it in sections. It has to be edited. That's very painstaking. And I'll give you a lot of credit for that, because that's just, sometimes the offers are pretty good that we get here, but I just, it would block me out for all of the things that I'm doing. And it's very, like I said, tedious. So I give you a lot of credit for that.
We devoted 4 or 5 days to it, I think. Yeah. In the studio, like half a day each day. Yep. And I think it was 6.5 hours is the entire book, because it's 340 pages long in print form. Wow. And that took 12 hours of production plus 12 hours of recording. Yeah. And then just refining and editing and stuff like that to get it into the format you need to send off.
Yes, that's a lot of work. So congratulations on that. Now you talk about obviously your book is going to, by default, going to express a lot of your political beliefs. And here again, this covers about a 10-year period. I think the obvious question would be is if your political leanings have changed, but I would also add a caveat to that. I do a lot of commentary here. We have a lot of guests on the show, and when we have an author on, it's about the author, it's about the book. When we have guests on who are co-hosts and we're talking about current events, we'll banter back and forth. And a lot of times I'll research these things, and in the process of researching them, sometimes the angle that I thought I was going to go at changes. When you get more familiar with the subject, sometimes you're all riled up about going a one direction with it. And then once you research it a little bit, no, that's not quite 100% the way I want to go. Do you ever have that experience with your work?
Yes, I'm sure I do. I often start with a phrase or it could be a subject. It could be, I have several pieces that are about school shootings. For example, I started with Parkland and several after that. And you don't think that you're going to, focus on the shooter or the children or the fact that it's a school and should be a safe place, and how different it is from what I remember of school when I was a child, being the worst thing you had to worry about is there a pusher maybe sitting somewhere nearby? That's the worst thing. But of course, people didn't talk about things back then either. Yeah. So it could very well be there was much worse going on and I just wasn't aware of it. So, but as far as changing opinions over time, I know that on one subject, I have changed my opinion, which is a Southern, Florida subject, which is Confederate statues. And when I first moved to Florida, I thought, oh, what a weird thing to have statues to these people, who lost a war. It doesn't make any sense. But I think, I guess it kind of grew on me as I learned more about the Civil War, and I learned about, that there were people who went around and reenacted the Civil War. Sometimes you'd see them at a Lusty, for example. They have a reenactment.
Those are very common.
And they'll have people even in Mandarin, there's a museum there where they will have people who are dressed up as, that period of time. And it was it was a formative time for this part of the country and certainly the South in general. And so I kind of feel that things should be preserved that are from the past. After going to Europe and seeing all the museums and all the things from hundreds of years ago,
sure.
You still have buildings, you still have, you always regret the fact that in America we have so little.
Yes.
That goes back that far. Obviously the indigenous people were here long before us, but as far as solid things that you can look at, there wasn't that much that that we are aware of. And so I at first thought, these statues need to stay where they are because they commemorate people, and those people are ancestors of people who are still living. And out of respect, like you wouldn't destroy a gravestone,
Sure.
You wouldn't destroy, somebody's old house or whatever. But then I of course, it became more of a political issue. This was shortly after Charlottesburg, I think, that the statues issue really heated up. And, I wasn't as concerned about like the protests at Charlottesburg, which, obviously, Nazi groups were involved in them, which is deplorable, horrible, awful. However, they have the right to protest, so it's freedom of speech. And so I had already read the case about the Nazis when I was in law school. So I was like, this has already been decided. But then as you go on, there were statues all around the world. It wasn't just in the United States. It was like all around the world, people were starting to question these statues. And I read an article that was like from a Belgian newspaper, a Flemish newspaper. And it was about King Leopold. And King Leopold was the king of Belgium. Belgium had a colony in Africa called the Congo. I'm not sure exactly what the current name is, but there were plantations, there were mines, there were places where people were in deplorable conditions, and millions died. Millions of Black people in Africa died as a result of a king. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a poem about King Leopold and his statue, because it was being, red paint was being thrown on it in Belgium. Yeah. And also, apparently there was, I might be getting two poems confused a little bit, but there was another statue that was, it might have been Victoria in the colonies in the Caribbean, mm-hmm. that was also, defaced at the same time. But they had a Belgian statue of a statue of the Belgian King Leopold in the Congo. And as soon as the Congo threw off Belgium, they got rid of that statue and they put it off in some warehouse or something. And then they decided just a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, to bring it back and put it in the central square. And it lasted a day. Yeah. They carted it away, like the people physically carted it away. And that's how upset they were about the statue. So then that started to make me understand maybe that's the way that people whose ancestors were enslaved feel about these Confederate statues. Yeah. So then I wrote a poem about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see a lot of arguments when it comes to statues both ways. And by the way, that the thing you're talking about with Belgium, that's something not a lot of people know about. And I would encourage people to check it out. That's one of the really dark periods in history. But the thing with statues in regard to, now you're talking to somebody who is the son of a Civil War expert. And
dear.
My dad took me to I knew all the battlefields, and I was way too young to know squat. I was probably like maybe in the second grade, and you really don't have a good fix on your own existence and when it began at that age. No. But what I do remember, and I wish I was a little older, was as I traveled through the South. Now, this would have been in the early 70s. This would have been post, the Civil Rights Movement. Mm-hmm. And we talked to local folks as we went through all these different Civil War areas. There was a lot of parallels to what happened 100 years before, except it was in code. You were talking about a lot of the politics of the Civil War, but it really related to a lot what was happening then. And the only thing I would add is that the Civil War is one of the few instances, the old adage is that, history is written by the victors. That's what you often hear. In terms of the Civil War, that wasn't the case. The South, for some reason, usurped all the credibility in writing a lot of the lore. That's how General Lee became a hero. That's how Jesse James became a hero. And that's how Grant became a butcher. And so it's interesting. And actually, Grant deserves a lot of credit, not to get into it, but he was very open to, opening up not only voting rights, but political positions. A lot of the things that you hear about were during his time.
You mean opening them back up to the Confederate?
No. For integration.
I see.
Yeah, his time with Lincoln really changed him. I don't think he really had a lot of feelings one way or the other about slavery. And I can't speak with the authority of a historian, but he really became anti-slavery, and he really tried to carry on what Lincoln wanted with the ability to vote. And if you look at his presidency, there were a lot of Southern Black individuals in higher places of government. But as that grew, so did the resistance. And that's where a lot of the KKK and all that came from, and voter intimidation. That's where all that came from. So he was actually way ahead of the curve, but he did not have the support to be able to be effective. But you don't hear that about Grant, because all you hear is he's a butcher. And here again, this is largely because a lot of the Southern institutions of the time wrote the history of Civil War and post. And at this one time, the losers wrote history. But that's, here again, that's my opinion. And, if somebody.
And now they're trying to rewrite it again.
Yes. Yeah. So, that was really, it was an interesting time period. I was too young to appreciate it. But as I've gotten older, a lot of those memories of traveling through the South during that time, and when I replay those memories, I understand what was really being said, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting experience. I'm glad I had it. My dad, I was born very late in my dad's life. He was afraid he was going to die before he had a chance to do any of those things with me. And as it turned out, he did die young. I was 18 years old when my dad died. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And he got some of those experiences in. I wish I would have been about 10 years older, to go to all those historic places. Mm-hmm. I probably would have gotten a lot more. But when you're that young, like I said, you don't have a good concept of the passage of time. What's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago when you're 6, it just doesn't really mean a whole lot, But anyway, we'll move on here. I'll ask you one more question.
Sure.
You talk about patriotism, and I'll tell you, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, because it can mean a lot of different things to different people depending on who's saying it. Okay. You talk about inspiring patriotism in those who feel their patriotism may be waning. And why do you
flagging, as I like to say?
Oh, flagging. Yes, that's a good
flagging.
way. That's a good way to put it. How does your book help that?
Well, I think I try to bring up the institutions and normal processes of our government that have served us well and may be attacked right now or maybe neglected right now. And I try to frame it so that people will value it. So I have, for example, I have a whole poem that's devoted to the vote. People, how often do people vote in this country? Maybe a third of the country elected the president. I mean, he got more than 50% of the vote, but how many people voted? Mm-hmm. So I have a poem that's called A Vote, and it's based on Emily Dickinson's poem that I mentioned before. Hope is a thing with feathers. I said a vote. I'm not going to be able to remember the whole thing, but Sure. It starts with the same meter discussing what a vote is. And it's based on a speech that Raphael Warnock gave on his, inauguration, I guess, to the Senate in Georgia. And he's a pretty powerful speaker. He's a preacher and very, very impressive oratorical skills, in my opinion. And he used most of the phrases that are in that poem are stolen right from him. And I just put them in an order that flowed and was modeled on Emily Dickinson's poem. And I have another voting poem that is Who Owns My Vote, which is about, once you cast a vote, where does it go? Can people just play with it after it's been cast? Can the numbers change after election day? Mm-hmm. Things like that. And it goes on and basically comes to the conclusion that I own my vote. Nobody else owns it. Exactly. You can't steal a vote from someone. And if people would use them, then, we would all feel represented.
Yes. Well, There's a lot of, you being an attorney, this is a whole other subject for a different day. But it really, there's those who say that a republic is certainly a democratic style of government, but it isn't a pure democracy, because with a democracy, you can very easily slide into mob rule. I mean, if civil rights would have been put up for a vote in 1935, what would have happened? Okay, so you have to balance the fact that the founding fathers really didn't want to give mob rule a chance. So that's kind of where,
that's absolutely true. I read John Adams from cover to cover.
Okay,
that's very true.
Yeah, I wanted to get your opinion on that, because I do believe, for the first time in my life, as you pointed out, I'm of a certain age. I'll speak for myself. I'm of a certain age. I lived through the Reagan era when everybody said he was going to start a war with Russia and all that stuff. And all of that was a lot of bloviating. Really was never really worried about it. But here the last few years, and I think the radicals, and on both the right and the left, I really don't have a political leaning. I don't really think our system right now is running the way it should, no matter who's in charge. And I think that the radicals on both sides, they were once on the fringes. I can remember, when Watergate was going on, I was very young in grade school. Of course, the Cold War, all through the Reagan era. And there was always a general sense that the wheels were going to stay on. But now yes. I kind of think that, what the founding fathers were worried about, all the safety valves are starting to leak now. And there's just too many people running around with radical ideas. And that kind of brings me to the last question would be, when you look around the country and the world today, what worries you the most?
I think my worry is about the balance of government. So the executive, the legislative, the judicial branch, all of them need to function effectively. And they all need to be given more or less the same amount of power. And to me right now, it's very lopsided toward the executive. The legislature is kind of pretending they're not really there. They're hiding behind their hands or something. And the judicial branch is full of very brilliant lawyers, and there's no reason why they should shy away from making hard decisions. But it just feels like too often they side with the executive and against all common sense. It's not what I would have expected them to do. And I hate to think, I think as a lawyer, you want to believe that the courts are not political. Mm-hmm. You want to believe that this is one place where facts rule, the law rules. There is no room for partisanship or for propaganda. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm just getting old or what is happening, but it is, I'm disappointed. I'm very disappointed. Yeah. And I'm waiting for the time when it's going to be very clear that bad behavior is not going to be tolerated by the Supreme Court. Mm.
Well, I can tell you this. A lot of what happens in government is very subjective. We have a way of looking the other way when it's our side, and a way of getting upset when it's the other side. And the objective barometer, like I said, I think is gone now. Even in the days of Reagan, you had Tip O'Neill. Even with Clinton, I would argue that him and Newt Gingrich, that friction actually produced some good things. We don't have that anymore. Those people at least existed despite their disagreements in the same universe, playing by the same laws of physics. And we have people now that are in their own world doesn't even cover it. they're in their own world playing by a different set of reality. And I think that's a dangerous time of our life. And I'll tell you what I think, and you can hate me for this later or now, whenever you wish. I think one of the biggest problems with the judicial system, a lot of people say the juries, the dumb juries, and I think maybe the time for professional juries has come. But the real weakness in the judicial system right now is the discretion that prosecutors have in terms of which ones they'll prosecute and which ones they won't. There's nothing that really monitors that. And
it's looking very, very dicey at the federal level,
yes,
for sure.
Yes.
And in the sphere of the president, in the sphere of the executive, it's, you wonder.
I'll play devil's advocate there. You could make the same. There was a prosecutor, I won't say his name, that ran on the premise of prosecuting a former president. I don't remember.
Kamala something. Yeah.
I don't remember ever a time here again when I was younger that prosecutors didn't talk about clamping down on crime, on the crime that matters. Okay. And here again, I don't, when you walk through a dark parking lot in the middle of the night and you're looking around, you're not looking for Pete Hegseth. Okay. You're looking for, do I need to run for my life? And I don't remember a time when it is so difficult to understand what violent crime and what crime in the streets, that should be the focus, in my opinion, of a lot of what our judicial system should be preoccupied with. And political shenanigans, whether it's Republican or Democrat, does not belong there. It doesn't belong there. But that's, if you go ahead, I know.
I was just going to mention that I have actually walked through a dark parking lot and had a bag taken from me. So I have experienced a mugging before, and I was so young and had nothing of value in my purse that it didn't really matter. And fortunately, I knew enough not to fight and not to put myself in danger.
Yeah.
But, of course, violent crime is a terrible thing. I think that crime is I want to say slippery slope, just to be,
Sure. It can be politicized.
Lawyer.
Absolutely.
You have to
Absolutely
say that word. But crime, when you tolerate it in small amounts or as a white collar crime, then come down hard on physical violent crime in the streets.
Yeah.
Then you're starting to play with ethnic groups or racial stereotypes or, and when you start to use police forces or military to enforce immigration, this is playing with the authority. It's saying authority is flexible. Authority can be very strong when it's what I want to do, but
sure, it
can be very weak when I want to pardon this guy that, gave me crypto,
yes,
whatever it is, it's the real decay, to me, the real problem is the disrespect for law in general.
Yes.
It's like, oh, well, we can manipulate the law.
Yes.
We can make a deal. And that is just the opposite of law.
Yes.
And that worries me, as much as the branches of government, falling into disrepair.
Yeah.
And federal starting to get its fingers into state and local, or, state into local.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's much too intertwined at this point with bonds of loyalty, which are also anathema to the American way.
Yes.
There should be no person to whom everyone is loyal.
You're right about that, and that's something I preach. I mean, I'm loyal to the truth, and I'm loyal to right and wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, a given act is either right or wrong. It doesn't matter who's doing it to whom. And I think the left is probably more guilty of excusing it when it's one way or the other, when it's in the street. And I would say that the right is more guilty of it when it happens in the corporate level. They're the ones that excuse it there. But that's a whole nother conversation for another time.
We're all human. Amazing.
Yes. So anyway, once again, let me make sure people have your author name here, Andrea LeDew, and the book is called Polemics, Political Poems and Prose. Where can people find the book?
May I show a copy of it?
Absolutely, and I'll have a digital image on the screen too.
Stick it up here. Yes, and it is. You can find it at the following URL, which is books to read. The 2 is a number. .com/polemics, POLEMICS. You can go to my website for Random Learning Comes, check out my other work. You can also follow me on any of the socials. I'm Andrea LeDew.
Awesome. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being on the program today. Now, you were worried that we were going to clash, but see, I was fine.
You were very well behaved. I'm impressed.
That's funny. Do check her out. And here's the thing: in this day and age, you're never going to agree with somebody, especially somebody who writes political material. You're never going to agree with them 100%, and that's the problem. It's good to get into stuff that has some meat to it. Some of it is going to taste good to you. Some of it is going to have too much gristle. But the fact of the matter is that we are picking and choosing the facts and the opinions that already enforce what we already believe. And I don't believe that's good. I like stuff that's intellectually stimulating. This type of material is. Some of it's funny, some of it's sad. But it's something that you should embrace. This is the type of thing we need to embrace. And I think that across the board.
We need to get out of our own little circles, our silos, yes, and reach out to people who don't necessarily agree with us on everything, because it's only together that we can keep this country strong.
Absolutely. Well said. My name is Billy Dees. You can find the Billy Dees podcast on just about all the major podcast platforms. We are on all of them. We have about a 10-year history, and real easy to find the Billy Dees podcast. Find it on your favorite podcast platform. Social media, I'm on all of them, but the one I probably bounce around on the most, because of the fact that it is so trending and it is so real time, would be the former Twitter, which is now X, at Billy Dees there. And you can check out updates about the podcast and things that are going on in the news right there on my X account. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.